Why do we not have Brandon on here? We should have you on here too, dude.
I don't know what you're talking about.
On the what the fuck is that buzz? I hope it's a headphone app.
I hear it a little bit. Now I hear that echo.
Yeah, that'll go away. So here's it's going to sound like this until at the end of the intro, and then I'm going to pull it down so you won't hear it.
Okay. All right, it's coming up on Facebook with the countdown stuff.
Good. We're going to mute this.
Welcome to Final Gravity, brought to you by Come and Brew It Radio, the show where we take evaluation to a whole new level beyond judging. We evaluate from recipe to glass. This is not a style show, it's a your beer show. Unlike blind judging, Brandon, Martin, and James Lallande will evaluate your beer alongside your recipe and your process based on what you wanted to brew, then provide perception, feedback, and a little unsolicited advice.
So, Brandon, get ready for that unsolicited advice.
Lots of unsolicited advice. I think every bit of advice I've ever given in my entire life was unsolicited. So why should anything change now?
That makes it fun, right?
Yeah. So welcome to episode number 1 of Final Gravity. We've been talking about this a lot on the show recently and trying to get this thing off the ground. I'm really excited to sit down and do the first episode, hopefully the first of many. This should be a lot of fun to just sit down and really talk in detail about a couple of beers, having all the information in front of us. It's not real common that we have a full set of recipe and brewer's notes and everything on a beer when we taste it. So I think it's going to be a good time.
No doubt about it. And that's one of the biggest things when you look at it from a judging point of view is the expectation of never assuming. Well, we're going to be able to take some of that assuming out and really talk about your beer. And then on top of that is there's so many homebrewers out there that really like to make something that's theirs and not necessarily fit a style. And when we talked about doing this, I said, I don't want to do all just a BJCP type style because that's not what it's about. It's about what you want and how you enjoy it. And one of the key takeaways for each one of these brewers and these two gentlemen that sent in beers this time is to know, no matter what we say, if you like your beer, and you want to keep brewing it that way, you keep brewing it. And we're just going to give you what our opinions are and what we like, dislike, and would tweak if it were making it for ourselves. But if it's what you want and it's 100% exactly what you want, don't change a thing.
I think a lot of times too, when we're giving our own beer to another person and asking them for evaluation and feedback, what we're really doing is we're looking for them to say a couple of the same things that we think ourselves about our beer. And that kind of verifies, okay, we're both on the same track here, and then maybe make changes based on that. So I think we have a lot better chance of doing that with all of this information in front of us rather than just tasting a homebrew, particularly at a homebrew meeting or something like that where we're 6 or 8 beers in or something like that. You know, now we've just got these 2 things to concentrate and really look at.
No, that's exactly right. And like tonight, we're only going to do 2 beers, and most nights we should only do a couple, so that way we can really narrow it down. One of the key things to remember, especially as you get feedback and give feedback, it's always about time, place, what's happening right then and there. Because I could try one of these beers tonight and then tomorrow have another one, and the settings are different. What I drank before it may be different. You never know. So that's always a grain of salt you have to realize if you do enter it into a competition that one comment may be a little bit different, and it could be nothing more than the beer that was before yours. Or it could just be something that was an aroma in the room that just completely changed things.
And we've also found from bottle to bottle things change too, depending on how it was stored and how it was packaged. And you know, on a homebrew level, we're not working with completely sterile anything. Sanitation and sterilization are 2 completely different things. You know, we did that not this past Blue Bonnet, but the one before. Saved some of the beers, the Omega beers that we had first done with some of the Bring the Funk and Where to Funk and all that, entered them in competition and then opened the bottles and drank them when we were looking at the score sheets. And there were a couple of score sheets that we thought, I don't know where they're coming from on this. It's crazy. I didn't get this from that beer at all. And then we'd open up a bottle and go, oh, this bottle's like that.
Yes.
And so you never know what kind of anomalies you're dealing with. So you just kind of look for 1 or 2 key things to pull from somebody evaluating your beer, and if you can get 1 or 2 things from somebody, you know, tasting it and evaluating and giving you some advice, that's really good, and you know, you move forward from there and kind of get it how you want it. So we've got 2 different beers tonight. One of them is going to be straight up traditional style, and then the other one is going to be a little bit more of a fun kind of, this is a beer I made because I wanted to taste a certain way, not necessarily a strict style. So it'll be a good place to start. We've got one person very familiar to the show, and then another person very familiar to the shop here that Stubby has been raving about his beer. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, wonderful. Me too. And that's, I think, one of the pieces that you just hit on, and I think I said it earlier. I just want to reiterate. I'm looking forward to people sending in their beers that are something different. and it could be something that sits between styles. Now, if you think you nailed the style, we're more than welcome to jump on that one as well. But the person that wants to make one that sits right between two intentionally, not from a competition, I'm going to enter it in both, but I want to make this, German Pilsner, but I'm going to use a hop that would never, ever work with a German Pilsner because that's what I want to be able to showcase. I'm looking forward to those type of things. So if you got them, please send them in to us.
And that's how I tend to brew at home, too, because I don't brew for competition. I learned long ago that I brew for competition and 3 bottles go off to somebody, and then I've got the rest of my 5-gallon batch to deal with, and I'd much rather have something that I want to drink. And so I kind of brew between styles a lot of times just because it matters what I want to pull a pint of at night after work when I'm relaxing.
And that's the important. What do I want when I'm at home? Because you got 5 gallons or 10 gallons of it there. It's going to last you a little while, and I want to have what I want. And
right.
So that's what we're looking forward to. I'm looking to see what other home brewers are out there are wanting to make for themselves, not make for a competition, make for themselves and what they're enjoying at home. I know I have a few that I like to do that just wouldn't fit anywhere, but I'm going to keep brewing them because I enjoy drinking them at home.
So let's dive in here. The first one that we've got is from a local guy here, Matt Engelman, who's a customer of the shop. And like we said, this is a straightforward take on a classic style, which is a Belgian Golden Strong.
Ooh, that's one of my favorite styles out there.
Absolutely,
Delirium Tremens.
Yeah.
And it's such a good delicate style to be even. And it's hard to say on a lot of the Belgians because so many of the Belgian beers out there are so yeast driven. Well, this one is about simplicity and letting the yeast do all of the work without letting it be overly Belgian like. It's got to have a lot of good fruit note to it, and then just nice, dry, and delicate. And so I'm looking forward to this one tonight.
And we've talked about this before, that this is a style that's very, very close to another style. The differences between this and a triple are very small.
Yes, they are.
It has a lot more to do with the lack of phenolics, and this is one that you get a lot of homebrewers brew or attempt to brew Golden Strongs, and I think that there's a couple typical pitfalls that they fall into it. So I'm really
no doubt about
to
it.
see where this one lands.
This is the fruitier one, and easily you can grab one, and the phenolics have come in. I'm partial to this style over the AAA. This is one
I think I am
really
too.
Jumps out to me.
And Duvel obviously is another.
I
really
think you're
common
both
example of
wrong,
it.
but that's me.
Okay, that's okay. you can think all you want. So
This is the guy who, after the Slayer concert, was going on and on to me about how Delirium Tremens was one of his very favorite beers in the world.
Well,
So-
I'm just saying that I had a great experience with that in Belgium. I'm just saying, But anyway, this is Stubby. I'm here in the producer booth tonight, so I'm going to chime in from time to time.
yeah, you're more than welcome to. And I'm going to tell you what first jumps out at me. We just poured this and. Perfect, brilliant clarity. It's it's a nice, heavy straw, more straight up yellow, not too golden, big, nice white head.
Moosey white head to it, yeah. And this is one of those where this isn't just getting hung up on how it looks. Because of how dry and drinkable this style needs to be, I just think you can't have any yeast left in it.
No, you can't.
It won't be dry enough, and it won't be drinkable enough if you've got yeast in suspension. And I think it's absolutely crucial to get this good and clear. A lot of times these yeasts aren't the easiest ones to drop out of suspension. You've got to do some extra stuff to them. You've got to cold crash them. You maybe even use gelatin or something like that. And he's done a really nice job of whatever he did to get this nice and clear.
Yeah, it's
The other thing is that this family of Belgian beers needs to have a good amount of carbonation to it. And, you're never going to get good head retention or anything without that carbonation, and it's going to change the mouthfeel and everything.
as homebrewers that can get tough, especially for when you have to put it in a bottle. For these styles, you can bottle condition them and to be able to get it to that level. But if you're kegging it and then transferring it over, it can make it tough.
Yeah.
This one appears to be bottle conditioned. But
it is. The notes do say it's
'Cause
bottle
they're smart.
conditioned. But bottle conditioned
For
to,
this style,
to 3
yeah.
volumes is what it says. So that would be plenty of carbonation.
Oh, it's extremely effervescent. I had a chance to try it yet. I'm still just amazed at the appearance. The appearance is just brilliant clarity. Head keeps jumping out, getting some of the aroma. I get all that that sweet, grainy Pilsner-like malt hits you up front, and then quickly fades away over to that fruity, even with a little touch of that phenolic type.
Just a
note,
little bit,
but
yeah.
it's mostly fruit.
Yeah. So while we're sitting here admiring this thing and getting ready to get familiar with it, let's talk a little bit about the recipe. His original gravity on it was 1072 and took it down to 1007. 1007 is right about the sweet spot for a beer like this. 1007 to 1005, I'd say you got to
100%.
get to 10 or lower
Yes.
with this. And that when I talked about pitfalls of this style of beer, brewing it, that's the single most common mistake I've seen from homebrewers in brewing triples and Golden Strongs is that they don't dry them out enough. It absolutely has to be well attenuated. So you've got to have a big pitch of yeast. You've got to, if you're not fermenting it warm during primary, you've got to at least ramp it up towards the end. Although with this one, I think I would probably ferment it fairly warm all the way through.
Yeah, it just depends on what yeast you're
Yeah.
using.
So his recipe is pretty straightforward. It's this was for a 13-gallon batch. It's 20 pounds of Belgian Pilsner and 5 3/4 pounds of corn sugar.
So no crystal malt.
No crystal malt.
As soon as I tasted it, I could have told you there was no crystal in
Right.
this one.
Right.
Why would you ever put crystal malt in it?
Well, so unfortunately, so many people think that you have to put crystal in every single style, and I'm coming more and more over the belief as you make these Belgian styles, you don't need any crystal.
I agree 100%.
Use your sugars to do what you wanted to do, and there's no doubt about it. When I looked at this and I saw no crystal malt, it jumped out of, okay, now we got something here that is on the right side of the curve, and then immediately tasting it, I can get where the original upfront sweetness of the sugar is, but then it just dries out, and it's got up front, and it's got the grainy, the sweet, the candy sweet, and then boom, all of it falls out off the bottom, and it goes fully dry. A lot of characteristics from that yeast.
And in order to dry it out correctly, I think that you, with a beer in this gravity range, when you get up in this 8%, you absolutely have to add some corn sugar or some Belgian candy sugar.
Let me
or
ask you
syrup to it.
this, James. I think one of the things that to me, I love both of these styles. You know, the triple and the golden. I know that we just had our preferences disclosed, but one of the things that I thought was that I think that's really confusing for people, and maybe you can elaborate on that, is to me, and this is just without looking at the style guidelines, for me, I would say that the Belgian triple has probably more esters than what a Golden Strong would have. You're going to have more of an alcohol presence in the Golden Strong than when you would in a triple.
So to an extent, it's just different esters.
Right.
Call it esters or phenolics. That both of them are all yeast driven, and in that triple, it's all of the phenolic notes. It's all that coming out, and then the estery. If we're gonna go straight esters being fruity and phenolics being spicy, if you wanted to cut it right down that line, then you're 100% dead on. It's the yeast selection and the temperature that you're doing. This exact fermentation that we're trying now, it's very clear to me that it was probably sitting right in the middle of that range for whichever strain what yeast strain we got on this one.
He used the White Labs WLP 570. It's a Belgian golden ale yeast, so
Okay.
it's intended specifically for this style.
It's
Why yeast
probably
makes another
Duvel
one.
yeast or something. I'd
Yeah,
have to look
yeah.
it up, but I would have bet you I bet you money that's what it was.
Yeah, it's not the same one Tremmens use. It's definitely the other yeast.
It's not as strong of esters as Tremmens. Tremmens has a very bold ester profile to it that this doesn't have. And now he pitched
WLP what? 50?
570 Belgian golden ale yeast. Y Yeast makes a version of that too that I've used a couple times and really liked. I use it on my blondes.
What
a bunch of
what
blondes.
fermentation temperature we got
So
on
he
this one?
he fermented at 78 degrees, so
Okay.
pretty warm, and then ramped it up to 80 degrees to finish it out. So that's a pretty warm fermentation. I'm not surprised that he's got as much esters in it as he's.
Yeah, well, and I think what that yeast is working well with is at this temperature it gives you a good mix of the spicy black peppery spice phenolics along with the esters. So it works really, really well, and that's where, as he brews this, if this is exactly once every single time, you keep it there. If you want to go fruitier, then you may pull your temp down a little bit, just because of trying to understand what this yeast does. I don't know this yeast as well,
And that's the thing is with something like this, you're going to brew it several times. You do need to kind of play around with your yeast temperatures, and we've talked about that a lot with Kevin from Fermentus. That you're really never going to know exactly what you get out of a yeast until you do it at a couple different temperatures and see how it behaves. But with something of this nature, you are always going to want to ramp it up and kind of finish up warmer just to keep that yeast active and really dry it out.
Okay, so according to Jamil, that is Duvel.
That's the Duvel yeast. Okay,
yeah. And to me, it seems to jump out that way because I get that difference between you looking at those two different beers, both fantastic in their own right, and it just depends on a little bit of personal preferences, and that's really where it gets into on any beer. Is where your personal preferences start diving into where you dissect out the very minor nuances, and this one brings out everything in the aroma. The appearance is perfect. I mean, we're drooling over the just the appearance here. Here, let me give you a little bit more of this, and then the flavor. It really goes through a nice flavor curve, starting out grainy and what you want out of a Pilsner malt beer, and then it has some of that sweet caniness, and then just starts to dry out there. And there's really no hops. There's enough hops to balance it out. And let the yeast do its job, and it does a good job of bringing out that yeast character right in the middle, and then it comes back in the aftertaste. Because after it dries out, now I taste that yeast character a little more on the spicy note, really late into the aftertaste.
And it's important to know too that with an ester-driven yeast like this, that in and of itself creates a perception of sweetness because they're fruity esters.
No doubt.
Those give a perception of sweetness. We've talked a lot about that when we talk about brewing saisons. That's one of the main reasons that you really need to dry it out because it's going to taste a little bit sweet just from the yeast. So let's talk about the hops on this. You mentioned there's no hop flavor to it, and there shouldn't be any hop flavor to it. What he used in this was 5 ounces of Sots.
Okay.
At 3.5 alpha for a total of 32.79 IBUs. My personal preference, if I were brewing this, I think I might go to a little bit higher alpha hop and just a touch more bitterness to it. It's a little tiny bit sweet for me.
Well,
and I'm really nitpicking.
Well, but let me kind of play the other side of the card on this. So he made the choice to use a low alpha. Mm-hmm. It took a lot of them, so it doesn't matter that you put it at the beginning. Some's going to carry through.
Right.
Maybe a lot of what we're picking up when we call it spicy is that size.
It could be.
You expect that out of the size. And I think that's what adds such a delicate note to this beer is it does give some of that little bit of spiciness, and they're working together just in this harmonious marriage between the yeast and that just that touch of.
And I do like that. I like the spicy and maybe even a floral hop would work well in there as well.
Absolutely. And you could make the choice of putting a quarter of an ounce of a
Magnum or something
Magnum
like
or something of that nature. Yeah, absolutely.
One of my favorite examples of this style that Stubby turned me onto when he brought beers back from Belgium is Le Chouffe, and I found that you can buy that locally. And Le Chouffe is. I've said ever since then, and it's become one of my beers that I buy myself as a treat, that if I had to pick only one beer, Le Chouffe would be a very, very strong front runner in what I would drink. And that one's got a little bit more
super kick-ass brewery if you ever make it to there.
Oh, yeah?
Even though they make you, they won't give you a table if someone else is already, they make you sit on the fireplace, right?
You're not Germans.
You're not Germans?
We're not Germans, that's what he told me.
Yeah, but they're in Belgium. I mean, come on.
I'm just saying.
So this landed at 8.65% ABV, which is right about where it needs to be, I think.
And it sneaks on you because I don't get a lot of that.
I don't get any warmth out of it or anything. So especially being fermented at 78 to 80 degrees, to not get any alcohol warmth out of 8.5% beer, that's pretty good.
No, real good job with that of being able to manage not getting it too getting it fusel at all. I mean,
I think that's a sign that he made a good, healthy starter with this. He pitched plenty of yeast because even at that warm temperature with all that sugar, they weren't stressed out. They didn't throw out any off flavors.
Yeah,
and Stubby's talked a lot about that when he talks about brewing his quads and his triples. That a gigantic starter is really, really key to making sure the fermentation happens correctly on these. In terms of looking at the recipe and what I do different, in my opinion, that's the only thing I would do different, and it's just a personal taste thing. And I'm talking 3-4 IBUs max. that I would add to it. But that's just a personal taste thing. It's not that it's out of the range of the style or anything.
No, I could sit on this one all day long. It's very refreshing. There's a reason that all of the commercial and historically this style was all named after the devil. Duvel, Tremens. You know, there's a reason behind that, and this is what'll tell you that the beer really showcases. You did a fantastic job hitting this style. To me, I wouldn't touch a thing unless you really want to see something different. If you want to see less of that spiciness, then use a different hops so you can
maybe just a noble hop or something.
Use a Magnum or use a Hallertauer, so you're getting a little more floral if that's what you want.
I would think maybe a Hallertauer.
You know, and then also dropping your temperature would probably less with this yeast would probably pull less of the phenols. But I'm not 100% sure. You just kind of got to play with it. It just depends on what you want on this specific beer. I don't think there's anything that needs to be touched whatsoever. It really brings out everything that I would want in this style, and I'd be super happy to have brewed this beer.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think this may be a good point for the show is that we may give you our opinion and just take that with a grain of salt, and because if you actually like what you're brewing and you think it's a good beer, don't change anything. But at the same time, you know, I mean, because I think honestly, I mean, wouldn't you say, James, I think this is a 40-point beer plus.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, I would score this 41, 42 probably.
So when we're talking about changing stuff, it's nitpicky stuff at this point.
Right.
But we just want this to be educational. We want this to be able to, you guys to be able to, if you want to tweak something, and that may be something we should put on the forum is what do you not like about this beer, or what would you like to see different?
Yeah, I'm open to that. I want to see that after we.
I'd like to see it after. Yeah, I wouldn't want to know that before I tasted it.
Yeah. Okay, and I'd be the same way. I'm in the. Because he did say this is a classic style. I would be in the low 40s, and the number one reason is I want more fruit and less spiciness to push it to 45. And if you've ever had my score sheets, you understand. I will give 45. A lot of people won't. I will give 45 all day long if I cannot tell you at least one thing that I would touch about it. So.
It's so funny that the times I've done that, I always feel almost guilty, like I shouldn't. I don't have any business giving out this score, you know.
No,
but sometimes I just can't help it. You know, you go through it and I just can't say anything bad. And these are the numbers I put down, and this is what they add up to, and I can't argue it. So
if you cannot give one, at least as minor and intangible as it can be, give it a 45. If you can give it one, and a lot of times that's the difference between that 42, 43 and the 45, 47. Is nothing more than an intangible note, and that's okay. That's just the way it goes. But there's pieces of that intangible note that really jumps out at you.
Yeah,
and it's not. I mean, while we call it intangible, it's a real thing. I mean, like I said, in this situation, some of the best examples that I've seen have a little more fruit and a little less spice. And now knowing what we know, I'm going to say that that's probably more contributed to that high quantity of a low alpha and that specific hop that was used, which brings, like I said, it brings a lot of wonderful characteristics. If this is what you want, you keep brewing this.
Yeah. See, in my personal opinion, I like the little bit of spice in there, and I've always liked those spicy Eastern European hops. And
as we say this, he may turn around and win Nationals first place
right,
with this.
Exactly. Yeah. The last note I want to give on this before we move on to our next beer, we didn't talk about the mash schedule on this. He mashed at 149 on this.
Perfect.
And that's when you're brewing these high gravity Belgian beers, you got to be sub 150. Period.
Absolutely.
Period. And for me, and just the way my system works, I typically mash a little lower than most people. I would mash this at 145.
You could
myself, but stay in that 145 to 149 range. Keep it below 150 to keep it really, really fermentable. And depending on how your system is and what your kind of results you get, you may even give the mash an extra 15 minutes or so just to really attenuate out. And he mashed out. He mashed at 170.
You definitely want all those enzymes to break it down to as many simple sugars as possible. Get that yeast to just go through and take care of business. And
with all Pilsner malt, and then of corn sugar in there, you're working with the easiest possible mash you can. So it's you don't have to get too fancy with it. Or
no,
anything.
All right.
Great job,
So couple of points that I'd like to make on this particular style, because I like to brew this. Any of the big Belgian styles I really enjoyed brewing. I think one of the things is first, you guys mentioned corn sugar. I would use that over a dextrose or a table sugar. Only reason being is because it's a disaccharide. It's a disaccharide rather than a monosaccharide like corn sugar is. So it's easier to digest for the yeast. So it uses less energy to exert to break those. Because anytime you have more than one molecule, the yeast like to just eat one molecule. And if they have more than one, like a disaccharide, which is like table sugar, sucrose, right? Yep. They have to break that bond, so they have to exert energy to break those two bonds. So one of the things that I think is really important is that even though you may have done that with table sugar and been successful, I'm just looking at it from a standpoint, anytime you're doing these high ABV beers, let's make this yeast as least stressful as absolute possible. And so if you can just feed these guys exactly what they want rather than to give them a more complex sugar, I think you're better off.
I agree with you 100% on that, especially when you look at how cheap corn sugar is.
Yeah, and you can't overpitch this one. So if anybody ever says you can't. That you need as much yeast as possible. And
well, and not only that, you're not going to reuse this yeast anyway, or you shouldn't.
No, you've pooped it out at that point in time.
So, last comment on this. This guy keeps the best notes of anybody I've ever seen.
Good job,
There's
Matt.
4 pages of notes here on. He documented everything from brew day all through fermentation and to bottling. There's on the last page. There's a note I didn't see. He pitched at 64. And then let it free rise after 2.5 days up to 78. So he didn't pitch it in at 70. That's where we're getting that nice, clean, no fusels.
Then that tells me 100%. That's exactly what I was started to assume at toward the end as we learned more about this specific recipe is he got no fusels because it started low.
Right.
Let it start taking off. He got all of the characteristics that he wanted out of that yeast because he started it low, and any of the spice note is coming from the hops. So I mean that's all those pieces go together that we would have never known. And Matt, I truly appreciate you sharing this beer with us. I look forward to having your beers again. This is a home run. Great job.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good.
Well, it's funny because when Matt brought these in, he's always been super awesome about sharing with us. And he goes, "Hey, I brought these for the show." And I'm like, "Really, dude? It's not like you don't brew home run beers every time, but
it's just as good to talk about really good beers as it is to talk about beers that need work too, because you're able to focus on the examples of the positive things that are done."
And I think that's a great point, because think about this: is if we're able to share with, hey, we just said this guy was brewing a 40-point beer, right?
Yep.
Well, the great news is that he gave us all his notes.
We were able to give all the details of why it came out the way it did.
You his recipe, his fermentation temperature, what yeast he used, what hops he used. So this is, I think it's a good blueprint for if you want to try to brew this style.
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
is a good point.
Yep, wonderful.
Okay, so let's move on to our second beer here. This comes from I was telling James before the show, what we consider probably our number one fan out there, Aaron Rodgers, who has an entire Come and Brew It wardrobe that he's won off the show.
Wow!
From winning all the listen and win key phrases and all that stuff. He sent us several of his beers before. We had him on the show and talked about them. He sent a couple of beers that were exactly what you and I were talking about before, that don't necessarily fall neatly into a category, but they were so good and we liked them so much, and they were exactly what he set out to do, that we said, don't change anything about this, just brew it and drink it because it's really good. So what we've got here for this beer is a polar opposite of what we just drank, in terms of this does not fit neatly into a style category because it's got a couple of different flavors that are being pushed in it, and it's a much more complex recipe. And so I'm really interested to try this. This is from Aaron Rodgers. This is his American Porter. It's a chocolate hazelnut porter is what he's calling it.
Okay, so we got a full-fledged spice beer, but we're going to add two different ingredients. So let's see what we got here.
So let's talk about the recipe a little bit here. What he's working with an original gravity of 1056, took it to a final gravity of 1016. Let's talk about the distinction of American porter. It's not one that you see or hear a lot. I think my favorite example of it, and I'm not even sure if they make it anymore, is Sierra Nevada's porter.
Yes, that is fantastic.
Yeah, which is a really excellent porter, but when you compare it to an English porter, it's not going to be as a smooth chocolate forward flavor because it's going to have a very assertive bitterness to it. The hop bitterness is definitely going to be there, and it's going to be a little bit closer to a stout than your average porter is, or your English porter. So,
well, and so this is one of those. Just I hate to get on my style bandwagon. This is what we used to call the robust porter. When you put the word American, doesn't mean it's a big hoppy
right.
Beer. Where it's absolutely your old robust porter. It's not as mellow as your English porter. Your English porter is a little more fruity. A little less restrained on your roast, where this one's got usually a little more roast working.
Mm-hmm.
And it can have a lot of hops, but it absolutely doesn't. You talk about the Sierra Nevada porter. I jump over to the old Smutty Nose porter. I thought was one of the best ones out there. There's a few others that used to make them and kind of have quit. We can get them now here in Texas, and most over the United States you can find the Bells. It also starts to fit into this range. So this is a really forgiving range on what the style should be. And it is a wonderful style to start introducing some of your spices, especially your hazelnuts, any other
fruit.
Spices you can do that.
And/or fruit.
And/or fruit, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's going to be a little bit more of an approachable for a big, bold, dark beer than say, a big stout will be, because it's not going to be quite as roasty, and it's going to have that chocolate to it that I think makes it just easier to give to somebody who's not necessarily a big, dark beer drinker.
And what I appreciate out of this one is using the porter as your base for the hazelnut and the chocolate. It really lends itself well. A lot of the commercial breweries, when they're going to decide to use either one of these two ingredients, they're starting off with a 10% beer.
Right.
We don't need to go that high if you really
what
want
we've
to
got here is
showcase
a 5.25% beer, which I agree with you. I appreciate that anymore. I like them right around that range because I like to have a few of them. The recipe on this is 78% Maris Otter. I strongly encourage using Maris as a base malt for these. I really like the big bready, toasty, not toasty, but bready flavor out of it.
So here's one of the things I would highly recommend. Any of you guys that like Maris Otter, give this new Munton's Planet Malt a shot.
I've been meaning to try that.
And the reason I say that is because I think you get the same amount of flavor and maybe more, but with less astringency. And the reason I say that is because if you look at Maris Otter kernels, they're very, very small. So you get a lot more husk to, what is it, endosperm ratio. So what I've noticed is that you get a lot of that really strong flavor, but less astringency. And the other good news is the Planet's a lot less expensive than Maris Otter. So
there you go.
Bonus. So give it a shot. We carry that at the shop at txbrewing.com. Give it a shot.
So he's got 78% Maris Otter, about 5% roasted barley, 5% black patent, 5% crystal 90, 5% dark Munich. That's 20 Lavabon dark Munich. And then just a little over 2% chocolate malt. Not pale chocolate, but regular chocolate malt.
Let's start diving into this guy. First things first is you got to talk about its appearance. Number one, the first sign of a well-made beer is its head.
Nice
head. See a nice little small bubbles, very tight tan head sitting on a black beer. If I got a chance to say dark brown or almost black, I'm pushing dark brown and almost opaque. If you just have to use that word opaque, it's clear, it looks good. Head just keeps sitting there. And
I'm amazed at the head retention on this. When you're pouring into these little competition cups and these small pours, good head retention still goes away by now.
It goes away fast.
And this is just sitting on here. It's a really nice brown, moussey head.
And he introduced two ingredients that can often add oils. And typically we'll know oils to kill a head. Well, guess what? he did something with this one already. Just looking at it, that really showcased the ability of the way he made this beer. So looking at it, looks beautiful. Now let's what does it smell like? I get those hazelnuts up front.
I get the hazelnut up front, and I do get a pronounced chocolate out of it. I got to say, when I looked at this recipe to begin with, my first thought was, this is going to be too roasty. When you're looking at black patent and roasted barley, and then some really dark crystal in there and some dark Munich, I thought this is going to taste more like a stout. Plus, he's using regular chocolate malt here. We've talked about this a lot on the show, that regular chocolate malt is a very dark malt. It's really easy to overuse it. It can be real harsh. Normally, if you're looking to put chocolate flavor into a beer, we recommend the pale chocolate. So looking at the recipe, I thought this was going to be harsher than it is, and it's not. I get a nice, prominent chocolate and hazelnut flavor out of it. And he didn't actually add chocolate to this beer. He's just using the chocolate malt for the flavor.
Okay.
So I think he really accomplished that well, personally.
Well, and that's I see the other side of it. I see the hazelnut jumps out up front.
Mm-hmm.
The chocolate, I would have said that it's there. You told me it's there. I can get it there. I have a hard time distinguishing how much if this is real chocolate cocoa nibs or if it was the roasted malt, and now you told me the difference, and knowing what he put in this beer, I know why it came out. That dark
the dark
crystal malt.
Oh, dark crystal.
No, the dark crystal is what was the magic on this from an aroma. Have not tried it yet, but from an aroma standpoint, that was the magic. You have to do a really good porter. You need black patent. The chocolate malt. I'm a fan of chocolate malt on both my porters and my stouts. But the big difference when you start jumping into your porters versus your stouts is the additional crystal malt, the heavier crystal malts, and then using that black patent. I think those are the things that really showcase the style. And I
like the dark Munich in there too. I thought that was a nice addition.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot on the show about simplifying recipes, and a lot of times when you and I talk recipes, you're very much it's 75% two row, 10% this. It just real simple recipes. The converse to that is, I think with porters and stouts, I don't mind a more complex recipe.
So I'll tell you can brew every single style out there with no more than 2, and if you can stretch it to three grains, with the exception of porters and stouts. Especially porter stouts, you can do it. Even with stouts, you can only use 3, and if you don't count anything flaked as one of the additional malts. But now in porters, to get the complexity that you want, you really got to blend things, and like in this situation here, that from an aroma standpoint, the dark crystal malts really add that sweetness. It makes you think chocolate. So when you smell it and you can say, hey, I smell chocolate, then you can declare it. If you only smell that, oh, it's roasty and I'm not sure, then don't declare it. But again,
see, I think if I were judging this and not knowing the ingredients that were in it, and he called it a chocolate hazelnut porter, I would have no problem with that. I would say,
no,
I get chocolate out of this, and I get a real dark chocolate type of flavor out of it, not like a milk chocolate. The dark crystal, I feel weird saying that. I feel like I'm talking about the movie. The dark crystal, you have to be careful with that. And he's nice and restrained with it. He only used a half pound, a little less than 5%.
Doesn't taste like raisins.
Doesn't taste like raisins. Boy, if you ever get to that point where you get dark fruit and raisins out of your dark crystal, you've used a little too much, I think. And he got the amount just right on there. 1 ounce of EKG hops at 60 minutes for 20 IBUs. I think he got the IBUs just right on those.
No, I agree. Now, I've just taken my first sip to try and get where the flavor's coming from, seeing what's happening with this beer. Get the roast up front that quickly drops off to the hazelnut, and then this one, just the heavy use of dark malts will dry it out on its own.
Mm-hmm.
It finishes very dry, and then at the end, that's where the hazelnut comes right back around.
Mm-hmm. And for the hazelnut, he just used 4 ounces of hazelnut extract. Very smart move, I think. Trying to actually use nuts in beer is very difficult to get the flavor in, then also
just
kills
like
your
pecans.
head retention.
Yeah, very
pecans,
difficult.
same thing. Yeah, don't try to be a hero. Use what makes your beer taste good, I think. And I like the fact that he used that. I think he got the amount just right.
Now, no doubt about it. Especially when you're using these nut extracts, you can go over the top, and then it just tastes like extract, and it's not pleasing. This one very much has that that aspect of the hazelnut complements everything else that's working.
Does it say how much extract he used?
4 ounces.
So he used the whole 4 ounces of hazelnut extract.
Is that how they come? I don't know.
Yeah, they come in 4-ounce bottles. Yeah.
And he put it in at kegging. Good job, Aaron.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's why it's still there, right? That's exactly why we can still smell it. That's why we can taste it. It was added at the end. I look at this one, and the more I try it, I got to start critiquing a little bit of the mouthfeel and the dryness.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about that. He mashed at 154, and he used WLP 004, the Irish ale yeast, which is a yeast I really like. I used to use that all the time when I brewed these styles a little bit more often. Fermented at 68. I think you got the temperature nice and right on that. You think it's a little too dry?
Yeah, so I like just, and I can tell that with now knowing where his temperature range and which yeast it was. It's got just a touch of fruit. It's not enough to say it's fruity. I think it gives it just an extra depth to it. I think the body and the dryness is a little too much. And this where
How would you fix that?
I had to put more crystal malt in this, but I would have put like crystal 10, crystal 20.
Okay.
And including with what he's done here, he only went with a little bit of the dark crystal. He could have went with a 60 or a 40.
I was thinking of 40. Yeah.
Anything in there just and not much. Probably another half a pound at most. Will give it just a little more substance to it. For me, it just is a little bit too thin.
See, now the final gravity on it's 1016, so I think in terms of gravity, he landed just right on it. I think that the roasted barley and the black patent are what's given it the perception of dryness, even
Absolutely.
though it's not.
Yeah, I might just mash it at a warmer temperature.
154?
Yeah.
154 is...
Because I don't know, man. I just like the flavor profile of the beer. I don't know if I would change it necessarily the recipe.
I don't think I'd want this to finish any higher than 1016.
No, it does. But it doesn't come across to me that way, and that's where we're starting to now. If you're gonna change something, you're going into dynamic changes. You're not changing one thing. If you're lowering the roast to not have it taste so dry, then you're gonna have to be able to balance something out. Otherwise, it may be too sweet. So that's where some things start to play in perception-wise.
Well, the dryness thing also might be the fact that it's a lower ABV beer.
Could be.
And it's when you ferment a lot of stuff out and there's just not a lot of alcohol and that kind of thing in there. You just get a perception of dryness
Absolutely.
That way too. We talked about that when we've talked about English milds and that kind of thing. When you get down in that 3% ABV range, how difficult it is to keep some substance in there and make sure it feels like you're actually drinking something instead of this super dry.
One of the things I'd like to point out, though, I still think this is a high 30, if not 40-point beer. I think it's still very good.
I didn't say that. I really enjoy this beer. I'm nitpicking some of the little things.
Yeah. We're just trying to make it from a 38-point beer to a 45-point beer, right?
I would be very, very happy drinking a full pint of this and enjoying it. I could drink more than one. I think it has so many wonderful characteristics to it. Just like I said, just from my own personal perception, I get a lot of that dryness that I would want a touch more sweetness in there, right. and wherever it may come, it may come in the middle.
Maybe you add a quarter pound of crystal malt.
It could be, and if you're going to add a quarter pound, then drop that mash temp down. I mean, there's the flavor of the sweetness is what I want. It's not necessarily where it's finishing on the dryness, because it's not dry.
So you think it's just a perception?
I think it's a
dryness.
perception thing.
Okay.
No, this is more perception than it is anything else. So there's and it's a very complex beer. You get lots of that roast. You get the chocolate notes coming out. You get a lot of that roast malt that naturally is going to make it dry it out. Very, very good job of balancing the bitterness on the roast versus the bitterness on the hops. And to brew this as a spice beer, you may be best just to leave it exactly where you did.
See, I was gonna say I don't think I have a problem at all with the mouthfeel on it, particularly if I was judging it. I think the maximum deduction I would give it would be a point.
Yeah. No,
what do you guys think about maybe adding some pale chocolate? No?
That my personal opinion is I prefer pale chocolate. Whenever I
mean, if you're trying to really bump the chocolate flavor up, maybe just a little bit more.
But I'm really surprised at how nice and pleasing the chocolate flavor is in this without being acrid or harsh at all. I think
I agree 100%.
He pulled it off. It's more of a high dark chocolate than it is a standard milk chocolate.
Or acrid.
And again, this is an excellent beer.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to look at the bottom of one of your styles, if we had to go by a style and we had to put this in competition, it's excellent. That's a 38 to a 45 point beer. It is an excellent beer. It has so many good characteristics to it. I do enjoy it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying anything that is saying this beer is not well done. I got the opportunity to have a fantastic beer, and I can nitpick one little bit of a fantastic beer. So, Aaron, you did a really good job with this recipe. Keep brewing it. If you're getting the same thing that I'm saying, that you feel that the roast is a little bit drying it out too much, then there are a couple things you can do. If you're not, and you feel that it fits in with what you want, then you continue to do it the exact same way. And if you're absolutely just dead set that this has to go to competition and win it, then start looking at about 10 different score sheets, not just one today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then see if you get the same comment, because you may not get the exact same comment. You maybe get somebody else that says, hey, it does taste a little sweet. I mean, 1016 for a porter is at the upper range, but it's not out of the range. It's not too sweet.
Well, see, and for me, my personal opinion on judging a beer like this, when it gets put into the spice beer and you're talking about chocolate hazelnut, I am, obviously you're going to have to make sure that the porter underneath it fits in the porter category, but I'm going to be much more concerned with how was the chocolate and hazelnut. Is it a good solid porter underneath? Great. Now let's get to how the chocolate and hazelnut come through in it, and that I think he nailed really well. And that's why I say if I was going to deduct this for a mouthfeel, like two of us judges talking about it while we're scoring it, and it was brought up to me, and I thought, okay, I need to kind of make a deduction for that. I think it'd be 1 point.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And let me just say, hazelnut is well done. I mean, we know that it was really an extract, and it was the right amount for this beer. You have a hard time finding some really good hazelnut beers. I think that I've had 2 now, this one and one commercial. Usually I get them and I don't like hazelnut that much.
Boy, when it's overdone, it's way overdone.
And I think that's why. I think people overdo it.
Yeah.
Or they underdo it. And so to hit the sweet spot, and I'm sure the nuttiness is also adding to that perception of dryness that I'm getting. So maybe this is absolutely perfect, and it's just all of those other things that are working to give it my own personal perception.
And I think on the hazelnut aspect of it too, if it didn't come through in the nose, I wouldn't be so impressed with it either. But the fact that he added it kegging, kept it in there all the way through the beer, and the first thing you do is look at it and smell it before you ever taste it. And if you look at it and you smell it and you're like, I don't get hazelnut there, even once you taste it and you do get the hazelnut, you're still missing a little something. The fact that it's there in the aroma goes a long way. I think it's a lot more than the extra couple points that you get for the aroma being right. It changes your perception of what you're about to drink, too, and that was a really important aspect of it.
Oh, without a doubt. There's no way around it that doesn't make such a huge impact. Whenever I do classes and start talking about it, I always bring up the orange analogy, that if you were to pinch your nose and close your eyes and eat an orange, you would never know that it's an orange. But as soon as you can smell and that aroma just fills the room, it immediately changes your perception of what you're having. And in this situation, it would do the same thing. All of those characteristics hit the mark. I like the use of Maris Otter on this beer.
Yep.
I would have said, if you're making American Porter, it really doesn't matter on your base. The base does have a little bit more complexity or richness by using that English malt.
Yep.
There's a nice complexity between the roast, and you're not getting all accurate burnt the roasted barley like you can often get in the black patent. You're not getting a heavy on the chocolate. The chocolate is complementing, and there's no doubt about that. Crystal 90 and the chocolate worked very well together, and worked its way through the process. So what yeast you said we used on this one?
WLP 004, the Irish ale yeast.
Irish ale. Mm-hmm. I've used it a couple of times, but not much. Yeah. It's
so one of the things that I'd like to kind of reiterate on this what we're trying to do here is one of the things I think is really neat is that I would even love to hear even more brand specific of what these guys are using too, because I think that's important as well. But one of the
Talking
things
about the malt,
the malt,
well, you could have gone and looked it up in your system.
Yeah, I probably have a good idea. But one of the things that I think is really important to really bring to the table when we're talking about these is that I think if you guys are interested in style or if you're talking about developing your own recipes, I think these are great. I think this episode or this podcast is really going to help you develop recipes because we can really talk about the specifics because people are putting the beer that they're making right in front of our face and telling us exactly what they've used. So,
and we've talked about it a lot of times on the show that your entryway into writing your own recipes is taking existing recipes and tweaking them based on I like this about
people
this
do
recipe,
the same thing in music,
right? Yeah. But taking a beer that you like and saying, I like this and this about it, I'd like this and this to be different, and knowing how to make the changes. And that's hopefully the type of things that we're talking about help be able to do some of those things.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it.
And once you do that, it's your recipe. Even if you started with someone else's, once you change it, that's your recipe.
Correct. Correct. And keep brewing it. And brew it over and over and over and over because, we're home brewers. We're gonna get consistency only up to a certain level and see what you get. And then that's what, like I mentioned earlier, or at least hinted toward, is you got to get 10, 12 score sheets back to start understanding. Is it consistency on the same batch, or are you trying to chase something else? So
and what are people looking for out of it?
And so for me, example that you made a great point there, James, is that we were talking about Matt Engelman's recipe earlier.
Yep.
I'd be hard pressed to change it because the next time he brews it may be a little different.
And
you know what I mean?
Leave it. But both of these, you've got a really good, solid base recipe. We kick this show off with two beers that are at least in the excellent category. Tomorrow I might drink this hazelnut again and say, wait, nope, I'm giving it all a 45. That either way, they're enjoyable. They make me want to drink more of them, and knowing. Just looking at the style and the recipe and what we've had an opportunity to experiment over our brewing careers, we can see certain aspects when you look at a recipe that just jumps out. I've talked about on one of the other episodes for Come and Brew It Radio about a Golden Strong, and I know it wasn't this same one because I looked at it and I immediately saw crystal malt. And it couldn't get itself all the way dried out. I've seen most of the commercial breweries all over our commercial craft breweries. When you go get a Golden Strong, they're always too sweet, and you always know where you can point it back to.
Even aromatic or special or any of those Belgian malts that you kind of want to throw in there just for a little bit of character.
No,
not for that style.
That sugar does.
Maybe for a blonde or something like that,
and
where you want a little bit of bready flavor in there.
Absolutely. And experiment. I mean, experiment with your different types of sugars. And that's where, if there were pieces of that one that Matt wasn't happy with, then I told him, play with your sugars first, and
play with your sugars, boy.
Hey, you gotta play with a little bit of sugar, but that's an easy one to play around with. There's just so many factors in there. And we jumped into two really, really nice beers here. Look forward to being able to keep this up and hopefully on a monthly basis see some new beers. Encouraged to send whatever you may want. Like I said, if it's something that hits the style, and you want to know it, we're going to do our best to be able to give you that feedback. And if it's something that sits in the middle that, I just really love this American style, but I like English hops better, well, then we'll jump off of it. And New Zealand hops. I had a beer just a couple of weeks ago that I just fell in love with, was a Pilsner, just a good old-fashioned regular old Pilsner, but they used all New Zealand hops, and they used a good heavy dose at the very end. So it no way, shape, or form would have fit the perfect Pilsner, but it just jumped out as a wonderful beer because it had something that was different, and which, they're all different, but to have one that is unique is hard. And so sometimes we want to play around and give it a little bit of a twist. Maybe we want to make that Pilsner just a touch of rye. And if you want to do that, you can send it in here all day long, and you'll get me Googling.
Yeah, so thanks a lot to Matt and Aaron for sending beers in. Hopefully, by listening to this, you kind of get an appreciation for what it is we're going to do, and maybe what we might be able to talk about your beer, and we'd love to have you send it in. We don't have a Facebook page or anything set up for this yet, so I'm going to continue to just throw my email address out there. If you've got questions about anything we talked about, you'd like to talk about sending a beer in, I've already spoken to a couple of listeners through email. Send your emails to my email address at brandontherep, as in Brandon the sales rep, at gmail.com. Email those over to me. I try to respond as quickly as possible, and we'd love to get some more beers in here. We're going to be really excited about continuing to do this show and really digging into recipes. So thanks for joining us for our very first episode.
Yeah, and look forward to toward the end of June that we can do episode number 2. We just need a couple of beers in here. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you, Brandon, for sharing some time.
Thank you, James.
And enjoying some beers with us. This has been a wonderful experience, and let's have another one.
All right. Sounds good.
Until next time.
Come and brew it.